We know that the autumn statement will be made by the Chancellor on the 22nd of November this year. But what's the difference between an autumn statement and a budget? Knowing this, you'd think, would help to frame our expectations of what kind of announcements to expect, and especially to anticipate whether the subject matter for the statement is likely to be of direct relevance to tax and financial planning. Now, this quest isn't helped by the fact that the autumn statement, or the autumn statements and budget, have a somewhat confusing history. I'm going to consider this history, confusing as it is, in 5 stages leading to the present. So here goes. Stage 1. Way back in the day, so to speak, we had a single fiscal event, which was called the budget. That's how I remember it anyway. And it was usually in the spring. However, since 1975, the Industry Act of that year, yes, the Industry Act, superseded by the Budget Responsibility and National Audit Act in 2011, imposed a legal requirement, I didn't know this, on the government to issue an economic report twice a year. What started off as a simple update has morphed into a second fiscal event, in effect, which the Institute for Fiscal Studies quite recently has said that they believe has become, and this is a quote, has become an engine for an over-proliferation of measures generating instability and confusion. And we don't want that, do we? They didn't say that. That was my bit at the end. So the original autumn statement was primarily a 6-monthly Treasury review of the economy, not a full fiscal event. Stage 2. From 1997, the autumn statement became a pre-budget report, PBR, under Gordon Brown. He heralded the PBR as a measure that would add predictability and stability, both good things, to government, while reducing uncertainty for businesses and the markets. In practice, over the years, the PBR grew in size to what often looked like an autumn budget. So even at that point, we were getting kind of 2 budgets a year. Stage 3. In 2010, George Osborne, remember him, how could you forget, the coalition government's chancellor created the Office of Budgetary Responsibility, the OBR, and gave it the duty, the actual duty, to issue 2 reports on the economy and fiscal outlook each calendar year. The second of these forming the basis of the autumn statement, replacing the PBR. Confused? You will be, as they say, or said. Stage 4. This is a really important one, this. When George Osborne was replaced by Philip Hammond, remember him, spreadsheet Phil, in the wake of the budget, sorry, not the budget, the Brexit vote, the new Chancellor announced that he would revert to an idea briefly tried by one of his predecessors, Alan Clark, not the lead singer in the Hollies and not that bloke who played centre forward for Leeds and scored against us in the League Cup final, I think, hurt his arm, or was that Mick Jones? Anyway, he said we should have an autumn budget paired with a simple non-event spring statement focused on the economics. So we'd have an autumn budget, and then we'd have lots of time till we got the sort of non-event spring statement, which would be focused on the economics. And having an autumn budget would then allow enough time to have all the discussion and consultation needed to have the legislation ready for the beginning of the tax year. I think that was what was behind that. The idea was welcomed by many informed observers, such as the Institute for Government, but like Mr. Hammond, autumn budgets didn't last for long. Stage 5, basically mayhem with all bets off. Because in 2019, a general election meant there was no budget, which instead took place in March 2020. And in 2020 and 2021, COVID-19, remember that, who could forget, it's back with us, with a new virulent version, strain, whatever. COVID-19 meant Rishi Sunak was seemingly in permanent fiscal statement mode. There was a summer statement and a winter economy plan in 2020, while the following year saw both a spring budget and an autumn budget. So lots of stuff going on. And in 2022, it started with a spring statement, but ended as a year without a formal budget. The quasi-Kwarteng mini budget was deliberately neither a statement nor a budget to avoid involving the OBR. Clever that. In theory, Hammond's autumn budget remains the official structure, but practice appears to have reverted to autumn being the time for statements. In the traditional autumn statement, the Chancellor typically updates MPs on the government's taxation and spending plans, but without masses of the tax detail that we love in the financial services sector, and certainly a technical connection. Increasingly, however, the statement, whenever made, has been used as an opportunity to launch new policy initiatives and to make the odd political concession where deemed necessary. Does that sound familiar? Probably. The now usually spring budget also has economic content and an OBR update, but also has the tax detail. It's the budget that we in the financial planning sector we used to get most excited about. Hopefully we still will. The Institute for Fiscal Studies recently reminded us that it's been quite the guessing game since Mr. Hammond announced that sort of nice, solid structure of autumn budget and a spring statement. By the IFS's count, we've had 3 autumn budgets, 4 spring budgets, 2 autumn spending reviews, 3 spring statements, 1 autumn statement, 1 disastrous mini budget, and 1 summer economic update since then, and not a partridge in a pear tree to be seen, nor anyone going off to mow a meadow. No old ladies eating animals either. I know an old lady, etc. They humorously stated, the IFS that is, that it's quite possible they may have miscounted somewhere along the line, and they might well have done. So where are we now, that last stage? Well, since 2016, we've had the somewhat volatile economic backdrop to throw us off the orderly track laid down by Philip Hammond. We all know about that, and I've referred to it just a little while ago. And although we continue to face pretty dire economic headwinds, some might think there's no reason not to return to Hammond's original plan. Here we are in 2023 with an upcoming autumn statement rather than a budget. But we're also only just over a year away at most from an election. And so the temptation is to use 2 fiscal events, I think, to grab the limelight, perhaps with the big announcements made in the spring, so that they are fresher in our minds when we go to the polls. Whether that will do those making the announcements any good is another question entirely.